No mai, haere mai, good day and welcome everybody. My name's Sam Williams and I'm the Safety Solutions Partner here at EcoPortal. In today's session, we are pleased to welcome Brian McKay, Senior Investigator and Trainer at ICAM Australia. It's a real privilege to have Brian with us to explore a timely theme connected to the AI revolution we're seeing unfold right now. Now, cybersecurity concerns aren't exactly new, but as AI adoption picks up speed, the risk of more sophisticated system attacks is increasing, especially in safety critical sectors. In this context, it's more important than ever for health and safety professionals to consider not only the potential hazards of malicious AI misuse, but also how we can start using this technology to help prevent security breaches and build safer workplaces. Brian will help us navigate this topic by sharing his insights from over 30 years of experience developing cybersecurity frameworks and leading AI-driven defense initiatives. You can expect a meaningful conversation about real-world risks, challenges, and the lessons we're already seeing as AI adoption accelerates. But without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Brian McKay is a seasoned expert in cybersecurity, engineering, and safety, with 30 years of experience spanning critical infrastructure protection, innovation integration, and project management. His career includes leadership roles at Amentum, Booz Allen Hamilton, Xcel Energy, and the US Navy, where he served as a nuclear-trained submarine officer. Brian worked with agencies like the US Indo-PACOM and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and holds degrees in electrical engineering and an MBA, along with a CISSP and PMP certifications. Don't ask me for what all of those stand for. Brian, it's wonderful to have you join us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Sam. And yeah, thanks to everybody at the EcoPortal team, so Miguel and Joe, for setting this up, and greetings to everyone.
Awesome. How can companies adopt AI systems while staying cyber safe and obviously protecting their people?
Yeah, this is the big one right off the bat, and we'll probably circle back to this, but I think before we get into what I think of as being, cyber safe or cyber safety and security, the first thing I'd say is it is good to me to group these terms together, because coming from the cyber side, if you're a cybersecurity IT, and then that trickles over, I think, to a lot of folks worrying about it, we do tend to think of this as security, as cybersecurity, right? Keeping out the malicious actors or bad guys. And sometimes, not that we're ignoring the safety concerns, but they become a little bit secondary. So I do like talking about this as safety and security. And the first thing I'd say about artificial intelligence is the fundamentals are going to be the same. There are going to be some differences, and there are going to be some additional things. But when we think of cybersecurity, and I would say cyber safety, at least think of three main categories. Confidentiality. So we want to prevent and preserve any restrictions we have on information. So that includes privacy. That includes your corporate secrets, if you're Coca-Cola or of that nature. That includes if you're working with government information, military information, any kind of classification. So confidentiality, it's going to be the same when we talk about AI. The other one's integrity. So we want to make sure that the data we have, that's going to be a big factor when talking about AI data sets, are protected from any, destruction, any modification, again, intentional or non-intentional, right? So the data has to be valid and has to be good. We need to trust it. And then availability, the last one, and that really applies from everything as you might think of that. If you are a cloud-based service, if you have a web portal, it needs to be available for your users, especially your paying users, but also the availability of systems that are going to automate different activities, or at least be involved in the automation of activities. And this goes all the way, everything from power grid to mobile phone network. So I think about these things. And when I think about this, I'll just say very briefly, because I don't want to get bogged down. When we're talking about AI, there are some textbook definitions. I mean, we're generally talking about an engineered system, and it gets very quickly into what we call a machine-based or even machine-informed system that will generate outputs such as predictions, recommendations, or decisions that can influence real or virtual environments. And they're designed to operate with some level of autonomy, right? So that covers a lot and a broad range, and we kind of break it down a little bit further. I'll talk a lot about machine learning, and that is really where we take a look at the algorithms so which a computer, as it says, learns. It observes data. It may build a model. It may use a training set of data like you would train yourself in a course or school, and then it will be able to go out into the world, observe new events, make predictions, or take actions. And then within that, we have deep learning neural nets, and we kind of get closer to some of the things we're talking about. And especially when we talk about the biggest example, but not the only, ChatGPT, generative artificial intelligence, where it's trained on models and then will be able to spit out text, images, media. So in thinking about all these, I guess the big principles I'd apply and to think about, and then I'm fairly certain we'll end up touching on these, is the first thing I'd say in terms of staying cyber safe is and part of this is an assumption that carry forward the things you're already doing to enhance and maintain cybersecurity and safety. You do need to learn a little bit about the AI systems or machine learning systems that you're going to implement or use. You don't have to go into gory detail. You don't have to go into the mathematics unless you want to, but you do need to understand what they are, what they're working on, meaning their training data and other data sets, and what they're intended to do. And that leads into the next one, is really think about the problem that you want to solve, the application, right? A little bit more than, why do we need an AI? And obviously there is a big rush right now. There's a big increase in AI usage, AI funding, an explosion of products, but really understand what you're putting this in place and what you're trying to solve. The next piece of that is then understanding the data that this will use and that you will use this for, right? So understanding, again, a little bit on how it's trained and ask for help, ask for verification and validation. The last couple of things, again, are very common to a lot of software development, cybersecurity, and even systems development. I group this as involving your humans. So for all that we're discussing now, we'll end up talking about a human in the loop. So in this selection and staging is rely on your experts to ask questions, to check, do the proper testing. And then, my last one, which I guess goes with not necessarily optimistic or excited, but concerned, I say is be optimistic, but always be skeptical, just as you would with other systems, right? And so with AI or machine learning adoption, I think fundamentally we need to go through the same steps that we'd go through with any new technology adoption, right? Not to sound like older man yelling at cloud, but I do think is looking at asking the right questions. And again, the hype surrounding AI can be compared to hype around other projects. There are things that are going to be extremely beneficial, but I would say for your own, I guess, position, your own industry, is going through it in a thoughtful way and a little bit of skepticism.
That's a great answer. And I think to touch on a few things there, I mean, I like the way that you say artificial intelligence because it does break it out of this modern view of what AI is. AI has been around, or machine learning has been around for a very long time, and it's only just become more accessible to, I guess, more awareness has been raised in the last 5 years, four
Yeah,
years than
yeah,
ever before.
yeah.
Certainly, I can say that as a software vendor, we are seeing a lot more organizations look at software assurance programs and basically having regular checks to make sure things like data and privacy are being done correctly. Now
Yes.
they need to do that again with all the AI enhancements to multiple software solutions.
Yeah, just as that's a good point, Sam, because as a follow-up to that, you're right in that a lot of these concepts, again, I'm not a computer scientist. I did, I was an electrical engineer and computer engineer, but they've been studying this and researching and developing for a long time, even way back when someone was in grad school. Their project was ECG classification using probabilistic neural networks, which now we would essentially say machine learning. A small project. And some of the biggest limitations that we and other teams that we worked with saw are some of the things that, as you mentioned, Sam, the acceleration, are some of the issues or problems that are being solved, meaning that big computing power. We didn't have the
Mm.
computing power back then that we have now, definitely not in our pocket or desktop. That has helped accelerate it. Big data, having access to a lot more data, using more data, understanding that. And along with that, the continued development in models that then say, hey, as I continue to refine my model, it gets better. And then the last thing which you pointed out is then, well, big money, right? So it's now at a point where there have been previous winters, they've called them, with artificial intelligence, kind of even going back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, now it's not necessarily the case. So yeah, there is definitely funding in people that are eager to both, fund development and then obviously purchase.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think API is a word that more people know about now, and actually is that everyone wants every system to integrate, and that's a lot of data flowing between different places. So, I guess on that line, we always think about API and integration from a positive light, but we obviously know AI can be exploited by malicious actors. So, from your perspective, what are the most common AI enhanced cyber attacks that we are seeing today?
Yeah, this is a very big concern, and just as excited as we are about AI, if you're on the other side, so in cyber terms, the offensive side or the red side, um, the same developments have made tools and processes that much more effective. So in general terms, there are a couple of big areas, and then I'll talk a little bit about some examples from some great sources. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, so for all of the things that we see people are using AI for, some for business, some for just, your entertainment, um, AI or machine learning has enabled a lot greater, I'd say, an acceleration and a greater wealth of social engineering, deep fakes, and phishing attacks, right? So if you remember the old phishing attacks, the Prince of Nigeria and his clan would always email. Well, machine learning AI have made those attacks much better. In addition to that, we take a look now at adversarial machine learning, right? And on the military side, we looked at this, we've looked at this for a little while, that again, as AI and machine learning have become more integrated, thinking about the other side, using that to attack your own systems, right? So if we're going to build up our own system, and we've seen this not just with ChatGPT, but even precursors to that there are those who are trying to attack that or poison it to give certain outcomes. That coupled with ransomware, and then again, just using machine learning and AI for every part of what we would consider not necessarily traditional cyber attacks, but cyber attacks that exist, right? And I'll briefly go through the examples. And the first thing I'd say is, if you are interested in this, and I'll work with Eco Portal because I have a series of links, but they're very easy to find. CrowdStrike is a company that puts out fantastic threat reports each year. They get pretty detailed. So again, if you're not, as detailed, you can stick to some of the summaries and get the highlights. And they have noted, and this year is no different, that the AI powered attacks have accelerated in identifying system vulnerabilities, setting up campaigns, looking at ways to set up backdoors and then exploit them.
Hmm.
Some of the bigger ones that they found that you may have heard in the news. So something that was associated with, and when I say something, it was really a campaign associated with North Korea, so the DPRK. They had a series of fictitious LinkedIn profiles. They used generative AI to create these the text, the images, essentially to get jobs. And several of them actually worked with what we think is the ultimate goal of gaining access. Then this trickles over to other fraud schemes as well, that basically there's an explosion of social engineering attacks. There are a couple of big fraud cases in just last year, I think March, April, in that time frame, where they had deepfake video and voice clones, right? Cloning to be the CEO or cloning to be a person of authority, and launching that in an attempt to, phish information. So we've kind of moved from you getting a random text with some spelling mistakes to an email with spelling mistakes to something a little bit more formal, to now, if Brian was your CEO and I left you a voicemail that said, I have a problem, you need to go in and transfer this money, and et cetera, et cetera, the chances are that now sounds a little bit more convincing. This also then translates, and they've had other state actors, but also groups use social engineering attacks and generative AI to create images, videos. Where I'm originally from, the United States, they've talked about this for a while, and basically to embed this with existing social media platforms, essentially to help influence, to sway, to spread disinformation. The other thing that this applies to is when we talk about any kind of malicious cyber attacks on network operations, right? So using machine learning enabled attacks, get emails, spam emails, trying to, embed malware. So again, a bit of a phishing, but really trying to get users to embed malware, and then using AI machine learning to kind of adapt to the defenses. So they've been several different categories that they've captured with that. And many of them, again, are larger actors, what we think of as state actors. So Russia, DPRK, Iranians. I think one of the last things I'll talk about is there's been several cases of malware that's been deployed to steal biometric facial data. So from different devices. So now we're kind of thinking, when I say devices, I guess I'll specify mobile phone devices, right? iOS, Android devices. And it's looking to basically, swap images, videos, and again, create these deep fakes and face swaps. So one thing that's, and again, this kind of gets back to, again, what I'd think of as not necessarily traditional cyber security, but in thinking about attacks and when attackers think about ways to bypass defenses, and they look for routes, well, generative AI, machine learning are giving them tools to do it. So both on the side to kind of create what I'd say content to help with these social engineering attacks or disinformation, but on the technical side, actually taking a look at what are better ways that I can enable my attack to model your network, model changes, and adapt my attack to defenses that you've put up. So I wouldn't say it's quite gloom and doom, but defenses always seemed a lot harder than offense on cybersecurity. So I think that AI and machine learning, yeah, they make you feel a little bit more nervous if you're on defense.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's certainly interesting watching the sort of smaller end battles of the student writing an essay versus the university software detecting the AI, and the job that writes the CV, as you referred to your LinkedIn article, versus the employer's ability to find the right genuinely written CV. And it will be really interesting to see how these develop into what changes really happen. I know I can speak from my experience that people are almost starting to crave in-person meetings again after a world of virtual AI, virtual meetings. So the I guess the proliferation of AI, it will be interesting to see
Yes.
how that then reacts from a societal perspective. So I guess in building those defenses and diving in just a little bit deeper beyond the common attacks, what would you say are the key cybersecurity risks when you are integrating AI systems in the workplace, and how would you prevent them?
So I think the first thing is it goes back to as we started. So in deploying them, the first set of I think criteria, or if you're looking at risk, the risk register that you go through are the same as other systems: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. One of the dangers is because of the rapid adoption, and it can be difficult to keep up with exactly what the systems are doing, is not having a full understanding of the risks and vulnerabilities before you put it in place. And then these systems also become the targets because we're looking for ways that potentially to extract data from them or use them. So there's a couple of things, and actually on the Australian side, I should say Australian, New Zealand side, their cybersecurity centers have been working with the US, the UK, several members of the EU in developing some of similar guidelines. And what they're coming up with is saying, again, there is a set of guidance that's going to follow traditional cyber controls. You need to have the same guards in place. So in kind of looking at the risks and evaluating, am I integrating with my system? What access am I allowing? For the users, what is their access level? What information are they allowed to see? What roles do administratives or elevated users? What privileges do they have? On top of that, though, there are specific implementations, excuse me, and this kind of gets into the realm of when we're putting a system in place, what is the setup and configuration? Because this AI may need access to, again, training data sets, other data sources. How do I integrate that with my network? How do I manage this environment? Is this cloud-based? Who is providing the assurance if I'm using a cloud provider? Another big thing that you have to do, and again, it's done, for those from, again, in adopting software systems, is taking a look and working with the provider on what is their threat model for the system, and what testing have they done, and providing assurance. And there are developers that are doing this and products that are doing this to show this is the testing we've done, this is the way that the implementation needs to be done because this is the threat model we've developed. And then it gets back to, again, what I'd say is, kind of more traditional things, which is you want a robust architecture, but you have to harden that, right? And again, looking at access to certain ports, how much access do you need to provide? Is this something, ChatGPT is essentially, out there. If you have an account, you can log in depending on the number of users. Not all businesses are gonna need to do that. So there are a couple of other things that can help. So in the United States, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, has been, and again, this is for decades, putting out really good general guidance on IT controls, cybersecurity, risk management frameworks. And they usually work with other international bodies, and they have taken a look at some AI specific risks. Some of the things we really haven't talked about yet, which are a little bit different, is again, the data. And I think we'll get into some data discussions later on. But in looking at the data that's been used for training and really trying to understand what that representation is, right? There's bias, there may be some data quality issues. That introduces a risk if you don't fully understand that. The other thing is does that training need to get refreshed? Some of the systems that we talk about that are on supervised learning, and as things develop and evolve, especially in terms of updates, what additional data is coming in? And then again, this is something where I would say, and even myself, really trying to understand the models that they're using, right? The algorithms that they're using. And again, taking a look at it and working with them and maybe some of your security experts to work with what are some of the vulnerabilities that are present and how are they addressing it. Some of the other risks that now go a little bit beyond maybe what we think of as in security, but still are relevant, come down to costs and resourcing, right? So
Yeah.
AI systems are now more, computationally intensive. They require more power. They require more computing resources. And again, if you're using a cloud provider using cloud resources, again, having those, that service agreement and understanding that so that you don't run into a problem where you have availability concerns.
It's certainly, I mean, it's to some degree overwhelming. I mean, the level of maturity that you're discussing is not even present in some organizations for things that have been around for 20, 30 years. I can certainly say it sounds like that robust process that needs to be in place is something that needs to be learned. And I think that probably begs the question, does this sit in the IT world with the IT manager and the teams that are responsible for cybersecurity, and or does the ownership move more slightly into the health and safety sector? Who
Oh,
ultimately kind
yeah,
of who owns
that's
that
a great
process?
question.
Because if I'm sitting here as a health and safety person with my hat on, I'm thinking, structural foundation, and I got to look at data models to make sure. So it's certainly who owns that process.
Yeah, and I think it's a combination, and I would say, especially from organizations I've come with traditionally, it I don't want to say it excludes health and safety, but it would tend to fall with the security side, so your IT administration security side, and then the business process owner, right? And almost sometimes that can be very adversarial, and many may share this. In that, obviously, the business owner, the process, they say we need this system. Here's the business case. Here's what we're doing. And security likes to be viewed as saying no, 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 et cetera.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, and that's one of the things that we looked at coming from a critical infrastructure side or the electric sector side is really trying to bridge the gap. We used to always talk about bridging the gap between our cybersecurity professionals who are used to the corporate network, and then those that were actually out in the power plants or distribution, many of which are engineers, electricians, and kind of bridging that and having them work together. And that last piece is then the safety, because all of that revolves around, for what we used to look at, is looking at large scale, high risk events, which then inherently have some threat to safety. So I'd say right now it is still going to be the business owner and your cybersecurity. But if you're, if you are a health and safety professional, you don't need to be an expert in IT or security. But I think the question is just, again, when we're looking at the risk assessment of this system we're doing, what are those, what are the risks and potential outcomes? And then what's the impact on safety? Because you do need to be aware of that, and you want to be present during those discussions.
Totally. And I think moving away from too much doom and gloom around the advanced ways that AI will infiltrate our data and wreck our organizations, I guess it goes both ways. For every virus and malware, there is some sort of safety software that's been built to protect us and be updated. So aside from being a tool for cyber criminals, I guess what AI tools, and you spoke a little bit about the practices, but what kind of AI tools or practices are currently being used to protect organizations and the people from cyber threats?
Yes. Yeah. So it is a good question, because again, I come more from the defensive side, so you always feel like it's a little bit doom and gloom,
Yeah.
and maybe sometimes for safety and security. But you're right, because a lot of the same tools, as we said, that attackers are using, defenders are using, and have been using. So I'll mention a couple products. I don't want to make it a sales pitch, and I'm definitely
Proudly sponsored
yeah, we're
by.
not getting sponsored, so I'm actually not getting a commission. But ones that I've seen and then used or work with groups that have used. Again, kind of going back to CrowdStrike, they've got quite a few platforms. The CrowdStrike Falcon platform has been very good, and again, looking at ways that they can use, whether it's AI enabled, and many of these are what I would say more machine learning enabled, to basically, again, scan networks, look for vulnerabilities, and try to make life a little bit easier for the defenders, right? So, it is a lot easier for them to do what I'd say the more tedious, detailed work of scanning your network, looking at vulnerabilities, looking at what exists as new vulnerabilities are uncovered, and then also trying to look at adversarial behavior. So one thing that we had done, and even, I think of kind of in the 2010s when I worked on some military projects, and we had a combination project with DST Group from Australia and groups of researchers from Naval Research Laboratory in the US and with MIT Lincoln Labs. And we looked at doing this. We looked at what are ways to analyze network behavior, use machine learning so that it could try to predict and stay ahead of attack paths. And so, roughly CrowdStrike Falcon does a lot of the same thing, doing continuous network assessments and then trying to enhance how it prioritizes risk. The other thing, which we've long talked about, is a little bit of automated remediation, right? So it's saying, again, trying to identify things and when attackers may get in or where there's vulnerabilities, taking that action to stop, to close ports, to eliminate things. You even see this popping up, and you kind of see it in waves. I know Microsoft, probably over the last year, has fundamentally changed their spam filtering, and a lot of that's probably enabled. And I've noticed that usually it has a lot more false positives, but you can notice the changes. And part of what we've always said is trying to get machines to help automate things and take action immediately for certain risks, right? So
Hmm.
that you're not relying on, again, maybe an understaffed department, someone to go through this, someone to get approval. So that type of platform, again, not everyone can do that. Those are ways that you enable machine learning and kind of integrate it into your existing network equipment. There are some others. There's Darktrace AI, which I'm not as familiar with, but has been getting a lot of very good evaluations and Gartner reviews. And again, does a lot of the same thing. So it really is combining these machine learning AI techniques to take a look at the vulnerabilities you have and also try to help you predict where there may be zero-day attacks, right? So again, these are things we don't know until it's released and then the vulnerability would patch. What it's trying to do is, again, do that predictive behavior based on observing the networks, observing other things, and training data that it's had. FireEye is one that has been doing this for a while. We had used that. So in FireEye devices, they have a long time tried to, again, learn from different attack vectors and kind of what they would talk about is accelerating that. So that instead of just waiting for this is the signature of attack, let's load the new
Hmm.
signatures, let's patch vulnerabilities, trying to make those predictions and then give you ways to improve your network before you get there. And as I can say, the list goes on, but you may even be, I don't know about surprise, but I know I have looked, and as we've worked with traditional vendors. So Fortinet is another big one, FortiGuard devices. And again, over time, most of these vendors have been incorporating these algorithms. One, because it makes the job easier for their end users, right? The cybersecurity professionals, and they're finding that it has better detection rates, better. I'd say in terms of the time scale of how quickly they could either take actions or recommend decisions.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's a very good point about the vulnerabilities. It reminds me of when they broke the German code in World War II. They didn't make a song and dance about it, and I think very much the same way. The cyber attacks, once they find a vulnerability, they're not exactly exploiting it straight away. So it kind of it leads to the concern that most of our defenses is waiting for one poor organization to get taken down to then protect the rest. So hearing about kind of accelerating that detection of the threats and potentially using AI is really positive. And actually it's a very heavy technical and kind of slightly theoretical topic because all the use cases and we don't know what we don't know. So hearing some specific examples like you've just done is great. Do you have any other sort of specific examples or maybe case studies where AI has helped to detect the threat or speeded up that detection process and any incident responses with regards to cybersecurity?
Yes, and the good news for again defenders is again it's getting more common, and there's a lot of there are a lot of papers that have been done about it. One that may be familiar, I haven't heard as much in the news about it, but I know, and even when I was back with the military, we worked on a few projects with IBM and their Watson, right? They were developing Watson, and one of the things they started to do is apply it to cybersecurity. And similar to the products I've talked about, they found in testing that again we are going to do a couple things. So we're going to go out and we're going to take a look at, all of this unstructured data. So research papers, blogs, threat intelligence, things going around that again, security professionals may know to look for, but just don't have the time to do it and read it all. What they ended up finding is they said that improves their threat detection rate. They found that there's about a 50 time faster than human analysts. So speeding up the detection process. It enhanced accuracy. So identifying, again, those true positives instead of false positives. I think there was like a 30% change. And again, the scale is they found that this could then scale up. So, it is still a little bit different if we're talking about, our small company versus, if you're talking about a larger company or if you're talking about a government organization, right? When the volume goes up, they found that this increased. So again, for a lot of vulnerability researchers in your security team, this does a couple things: saves time, increases accuracy, and helps remediate vulnerabilities. If everybody and not everybody who's on here, but probably most people and everyone is probably at least familiar with Microsoft. So their 365 vendor, they had a little report that they blocked a file of a Gold Max malware, and the biggest thing is that they had never seen this new variant. So it was a good example of them saying, hey, we caught malware that we hadn't seen before, whereas traditionally, usually
Mm.
that's the first indication it's exploiting a zero-day attack potentially, and then later we develop a patch. But it was caught and blocked with an AI pattern recognizer and working together with some other tools that they have. And so this is it's encouraging. Also, the specifics of the malware are that it kind of gets on networks and pretends to be a scheduled task. So it's actually, again, a positive of something that's crafted with a little more thought and technical expertise. So, and this is kind of, trickled over an ability to detect phishing attacks. Hopefully some of those deep fakes, will be included in that. I think the last thing, and this is a pretty recent story that I saw, is Amazon is also building its own AI agents. And one of the things that they've been doing, which I know we had seen some research on, again, going back kind of, 10, 20 years, maybe even more, of using agents to create attack signatures in minutes. So as soon as they're kind of, identifying a potential attack, creating a signature for it and getting it dispersed, right? So it can simulate both the attack and the defense. And these are things we've been doing for a while, in the lab and on the defense side, is saying, let's simulate what would happen and then let's build the signature. And what they're finding is that basically they're training protocols to do this in very proactive detection and then responding within minutes. Another key piece of this is that they're using analysts, kind of a human in the loop, which I talked a little bit about before, to validate these actions before they deploy it. So as they test this, they're getting analysts involved so that when it gets rolled out, again, we've had some of those checks that I talked about with the risk to do that risk mitigation before it goes out. And that's very promising because that's been a machine learning. Even we used to talk about that. What you really want is to say, hey, if there's a new attack, you want it in minutes. Hopefully even less than that, for you to be able to deploy the defenses and stop the attack.
A a quick question. Are people still the most vulnerable chink in the armor, so to speak? I mean, we've seen Will Smith eating spaghetti. If I want to see Adam Sandler playing tennis, it's a heartbeat away. Is that gonna be the real threat of my son calling me up or a video of him being kidnapped? Is that kind of the chink in the armor? And then how are we going to exploit that chink to then
Yeah.
have a corporate or structural effect on an organization?
Yeah, that is a great question because I think, and again, when I came up and through cybersecurity, that was still maintained as if you're kind of ranking it, that people might be the weakest link. And in cyber attacks is really it's looking for kind of again the most effective link. And social engineering over time has turned out to be effective. And yeah, we've always said, well, if we could just train, if we train everybody better, we could solve this problem. But as you said, the tools are getting more sophisticated, right? So one of the things that, like you talked about, I see a video of my son, right? Or I hear his voice on the phone, and that's been an overwhelming concern, especially because on the defensive side, and I was part of a project. This is kind of what mid 2000s, 2008, nine. Again, we thought this was a step forward. Is everybody was recording their voice for voice reset of passwords, right? Because they said, well, we don't want to just have a link. We don't want to, we don't have phishing attacks. So the ultimate way, if you need a password reset, is we are basically going to have this reset triggered to your voice, thinking at the time that that's secure. And of course, now we're, again, we've introduced this vulnerability. So I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't say automatically that, hey, it's people as always the weakest link. But I think just like with safety, one of the things that we always have to look at is what human error, may be present, right? And that's why we talk about even things like two-factor authentication and as strange as it is to think that, but like with the deepfake videos or seeing the photo of your, photo or a video of your son, I think the emotional impact and I'd say believability is far greater than we had these, 10 and 20 years ago of an email that claimed to be, and it looked like it was from, Aunt May that somehow found herself in Africa and she's kidnapped, but she's sending an email or she's stuck at the airport. And they might have a few little keys, but again, at the wrong time of day, anyone might look at this and be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm just waking up and seeing this." So I'd say just as we do with safety systems on security measures for kind of protecting or trying to weed out those social engineering. I mean, machine learning, AI defenses, all these other defenses go a certain way. But again, it's looking at the training and maybe then even allowing for human error so that if your first instinct is to go and click on that, we have some kind of pause to say, even like a delay period to say, hey, wait a minute, and give you a little bit of time to say, does that really make any sense? But I don't know that that's going away. I think social engineering and the AI accelerations have just kind of opened up new avenues that they can continue to mount these attacks.
Totally. And we do a lot of security training and it tells us what to look for in the phishing emails and so forth. But a real example from my end is we get a lot of customers wanting to use QR codes. They are the way of the future. We love a good QR code after COVID. But actually, with AI, you could scan a QR code and say, hey, replicate this page and make this little download link go somewhere else. And then it's just a case of replacing that QR code with one that links to your URL. So
Yes.
something a
Yeah.
high school student could set up and
Very easy
effectively
to do,
profit
unfortunately. Yes.
from. So definitely a lot of risks out there. Obviously, a lot of positives as well. But just shifting gears slightly, like we work in a very compliance, a world of compliance, so to speak. Hopefully driven by people like yourself who know what they're talking about and can put in the regulations that need to be there. So, what role, do regulations and compliance standards play in AI cybersecurity now? And I guess coming back to our point earlier, are they keeping pace with how quickly, AI is developing? Is there a point where they have to pause and wait for us to kind of level out on the rapid development and then start developing? Or, where does that kind of sit in this whole piece?
There are a couple efforts that I can talk about, and I would on the serious note, the good side is on the legal front when we talk about accountability, and potential, regulation, and then any potential liability. There are obviously experts taking a look at this. One of the things we found, definitely, I'd say Australia, the US, which I'll briefly touch on at the end, is the regulations have started as kind of a voluntary framework, right? So again, there's existing cybersecurity regulations, and it seems to be that that's what we're kind of using as the basis. And we're starting to look at some voluntary AI safety standards where the government is involved in using AI. They're able to adopt and enforce standards on their own, but in terms of industry, but at the same time, taking a look at developing guardrails for high risk settings. So in Australia, again, we have existing cybersecurity standards and potential liability, and even recently they've come in similar to what they've done in the US. I think and we had done this for the electric sector, but here they've kind of expanded it for critical infrastructures, taking a look at, hey, those high risk industries where we have to have cybersecurity paramount. Here are some compliance. Here's the compliance standards that are going to apply to your industry that you have to meet. One of the other things they've done is, so last September, they released a set of voluntary AI standards, and they cover most of the things that, again, you would want to see in a regulatory framework. So again, accountability, governance, risk management, how you test the human control, and then different things around record retention, transparency, and the process to try to, if people are impacted, how do we execute that process to overcome or have them challenge outcomes, especially if you think of if I have a tool for decision making, like for a loan or for even
Mm-hmm.
as been unearthed, judicial action. That at the same time, they had sent out a list of papers saying, "Hey, these are the mandatory guardrails that we want to develop for AI in high risk settings," which I think is really where, in the same in the US, when we had done cybersecurity for the electric grid, it really needs to fall, saying that, look, we do need some kind of minimum. It is still a minimum, it's a baseline, but it's to kind of, for these high risk settings, for both ensuring, mainly the safety and security of this infrastructure for everybody. And then secondarily, again, because of the potential either cascading outage or the potential that this is affecting far more than, say, maybe even your customer base. And so these guardrails they put in, and they were getting comments back. But the idea is saying, if you are using AI systems in a high risk setting, right? If you're saying, hey, I have this new machine learning system I'm now going to use for my my network control for the electric grid, and to provide transmission, so I can not saying this, but you can maybe do some workflow consolidation. In evaluating that at high risk, they're going to have additional measures that you have to go through. A lot of that will involve, the testing of the AI system, the controls you have to put in place, access controls, confidentiality, the network and the vulnerability management you have to do, and then your accountability. So I think for, Australia, it seems to be that it's taking a look at the higher risk use cases, starting with some voluntary compliance. And I hate to say, but I know that, cybersecurity, like safety, sometimes it needs a few bigger events for us to look at, to maybe say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we need to expand the bubble of what we'd consider compliance.
And are
So
those?
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, are those? Is that voluntary committee? Do we have any guarantees they're not using AI just to generate those standards? No, I know. I'm
No,
just
that,
joking.
yeah, well, as we've seen, there are plenty of committees that do that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
will. I'll put a pause in here for a moment. I'll say to everyone listening, if you want to put some questions in the Q&A now's a good time. We are going to address those shortly. So anything that you want to know, I mean, obviously we've talked about a couple of topics here, and we've got a few more things to discuss. But if there's a question that you'd like to ask, even outside the realm of what we've discussed so far, please just put it in the Q&A, and we can raise it with everybody. I guess one question I have is around, regulations is good, and I guess alluding to those people using AI to create regulations, sometimes it lies. And when it lies, it has absolute confidence that it is telling the truth. And I guess that's been a real barrier to adoption for a lot of organizations, as they've experienced this kind of they've experienced the integrity of that AI not really being very good. So,
Yes.
outside the regulations, which sound like they're still evolving, how can organizations now audit the integrity of AI training data, reduce bias, manipulation? We see CVs and essays with sort of white text hidden underneath just for the AI to read, so that it will, this person's a perfect candidate. He's matched the job description perfectly, and we can't see that on the CV. So, how do organizations as a whole audit that integrity? And is that even possible right now?
Yeah, I'd say that this is a tougher question. There are some things, but I think the first thing is, as you said, I think the first struggle for a while, there was a great book by Kathy O'Neill, and it's been out for, it might even almost be 10 years, not quite, where she Weapons of Math Destruction, where she really got into the details of how a lot of these algorithms were already out there and operating with significant bias and making decisions.
Hmm.
So I think, as you said, the first thing is, it is difficult to crack this issue. And in some cases, if you are getting an AI system, again, getting back to asking about and really taking a look at the data sets and assessing, that's not necessarily easy, right? But you do need to have an understanding, or if you're developing the AI, the training data you've used, and again, where you've gotten it from, and take initial steps to, reduce or address that bias. It's not easy, but some of them involve, now again, if we're talking about, more, I'd say more social data sets and groups, having representation. That's the one thing, is, again, data sets that have been now shown that they're based on certain sets of data that we collect in statistics, going back to the original statistics and looking at problems, right? So it's taking a look at, when they looked at crime prevention and crime statistics, there were a lot of things that they didn't capture. So it overemphasized, actual crimes committed versus, crimes that were not committed, or criminals that were not caught. And that bias was kind of baked in the data set from original statistics. The other thing to do is to try to annotate and to try to increase, I'd say, the fidelity of data sets or weight it differently. And again, this gets very technical and not even something that I necessarily do. There are some researchers at MIT, I saw a good paper that they talked about this. They're developing some new techniques to say, look, we need to go into a training data set, take a look at which are contributing most to failures in what we would think of as minority subgroups, right? So groups that we say, hey, this is a bias that's introduced, and try to go almost, point by point in this data and take a look at what we can identify as hidden sources of bias and correct that. In the EU, and when we were talking about legislation, they are the first ones. They've passed overall an artificial intelligence act that has some pretty, it seemed as a landmark development because they're the first to do it, that we're going to go through like we do with other systems classified according to risk, and then here are your standards you have to comply with. And one of the things that they put out is the same thing, that really, really need to take time assessing algorithms, assessing the outputs, and especially in cases where we do natural language processing, where we say, okay, natural language processing. So we know that there have been cases, and we've seen it with AI and ML products, where there's discrimination, there's hate speech, gender-based assessment, and then going in and looking at the data. And part of that is kind of, with that mindset, it does involve technical expertise. And NIST has also kind of put out a publication that goes into some of the details on how you do this. So again, from our standpoint, it is difficult because a lot of this is going to be asking the questions and really trying to break apart and get people involved who can help, going back to, if we think of that data, how to attack that and remove the bias. And then just the last thing, like you said, is again, testing to make sure that if I'm on the user end, I'm not trying to subtly poison that with different things and then get the AI to incorporate that. So kind of biasing it after with the new data that it's seen. So you have to kind of take a look at the model.
Well, I have to say I have some personal experience in the development of our AI model where I was enjoying breaking it again and again and
Yes.
again.
Yeah.
And now it's almost the other way in that it's so stringent in its guidelines that it's not giving me enough information that I want because it's not allowed to imagine anything. So it's definitely an interesting balance. But it's a good example. Let's say we got a lot of people here who are using AI for reporting purposes, and we want that data to be accurate. So if we have a case whereby the AI advises based on that data incorrectly, is that the fault of the software, or is it the fault of the individual? Do we need to have little tiny warranty warnings on each
Yeah.
prompt generated? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is another good question. Bring your lawyer with you,
Yeah.
because it is a combination. I think, as I referenced before, and we'd have to dig into the specifics. In the European Union, they're placing the majority emphasis on the developer, which makes sense, but it's not everything, right? So it is going to be a combination of the developer and any kind of guarantees that they have and kind of assessment of what they've done. But then the deployer as well bears some risk, because you're right in that, again, it's like any other tool you use, that you can use this tool, and depending on the testing you've done, you need to be able to show that, okay, we've adopted this AI system, Brian's new AI system, right? But as part of our due diligence, we've said, well, look, they are going to bear some accountability, but if this breaks or if this provides something and then we face liability, we know we need to show that, hey, we've done risk assessments. We've taken a look at data privacy. We've taken a look as best possible as bias. We've tried to identify where there are risks and the consequences and done our risk assessments. The other things going forward is that, and it's not necessarily always on the customer, but on going back to your provider and saying, well, what quality checks and audits are they doing, the AI provider? So Brian, what are you doing on your AI system, right? Are you getting outside organizations to do, like you said, to try to break the AI, right? Do penetration testing. What other security measures do we need to put in place? I hate to default to, insurance, but that is another big thing, to try to take a look at the liability, because thinking through, if this happens, what is our remediation for this, right? Are there
Mhm.
financial liabilities for us? What are our terms and conditions with the supplier? the one thing this may do, and again, not to curb the enthusiasm or excitement, but these are all questions with your just as you would the terms and conditions with software providers that a lot of times get go through quickly. But
Yeah, we're gonna have to cut you off there,
yeah,
Brian.
go
We don't want to
ahead.
talk about terms and conditions with the provider. We'll just ignore that part. No, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. We have a couple of questions, which is essentially around now. What can we do now? What is the kind of policy that we should be giving to our employees now around AI usage? Is there some guidance that we should set? Should we be a little bit protective? Should we be a little bit fluid? What is the advice that you would kind of give to those organizations? Solve their problems in one
That's,
sentence.
and I would say, and again, this I don't mean to sound negative, but I'd say kind of going back to you can be optimistic but skeptical. I'd say
Mhm.
in the realm of kind of in our company in our work environment, be thinking of ways to innovate and playing and testing, but that's what you have to do. Don't rush to roll this into prime time. Actually play and test, but in a controlled environment, right? Many of us have probably done it with chat GPT tools. There's a great professor, and I'd encourage anyone to go look at any of his speeches. James Mickens from Harvard, he's a computer scientist, but he's talked a lot about blockchain, machine learning, and leading into AI. And one of the things he said, which kind of gets back to this, is really think of these as all part of safety and security going together, right? So we do want to use these tools to benefit us, but we need to make sure we're addressing the risks carefully. And so if you are sitting, and again, I'm assuming you are not the security expert or the artificial intelligence expert. Just remember skepticism. And these are his words, but if you remember nothing else, my guidance would just echo his. As he said, hey, 3 words that I have. If you find something great, just think before deploying it. And if 3 words aren't enough, depending on where you sit, here are 2 words. Think first. Just think first. And if that's not enough, if that's too much, rather, if you're like, no, I need it simpler, his 1 word is don't. Just don't, and you'll be fine.
Look, I think that is fantastic advice for us to get close to ending on. I will just answer one more question here around the information you're feeding the AI. Does it become public access? Maybe you can answer that, Brian. I think it really depends on what boxes you tick, whether that data is being used to further train the AI or we are keeping that in kind of a segregated environment. Is that about right?
I'd agree. Yeah, the great answer is it depends, but you're right. But that's something to think through, because that's when we talk about data leakage, that is one thing that you have to be aware of. And not just for if I input something into your AI and it becomes public and I didn't mean to, but again, when we kind of get back to malicious attacks, so similar to what we used to do with web portals and SQL injections, is plenty of individuals and groups are thinking of ways to essentially input something, not only to take control of the AI, but to have it give me data. And the last thing I think is not just for data that maybe a user is inputting, but if you're talking about training data or other data you're using on the back end, really think hard about it and really try to eliminate using sensitive data in trading data sets. Because if you don't understand the model, that may leak out or come out, right? If I've trained my model on all of our financials for the last 10 years, to help do some predictions, but that's not public, or not all of that's public, it may just end up becoming part of the next year's predictions without me realizing it, and the AI could spit it back out to somebody. So yeah, it kind of comes back to being careful in assessment and really what you're trying to work with.
Look, that's fantastic, Brian. And I think one thing I would just say is that it's you're not expected to understand everything here, but at least you have the interest to know that this is kind of the area that you should be thinking about, and this is going to continue to develop. I just want to thank you again, Brian, for sharing your time, your expertise, for being incredibly well spoken and articulate in the way that you've described the things to make it understandable to people who aren't experts in that area. Hopefully, people have taken some key insights and are learning how to build their safe culture while adopting these AI systems and solutions and workflows, because it's everywhere and it's powerful, but with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
So thank you to you. Um, so yes, thank you, Brian, and
All right.
it's been a pleasure. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and ka kite ano.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to safetyCast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues, because safety knowledge is meant to be shared. Stay safe, stay engaged, and be sure to catch our next episode for more expert insights. See you then.